Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Femme podcast. I'm your host, McClain Acri, and here at Femme, we are a series designated to showcase both men and women in the AEC industry, breaking barriers. We also like to showcase different struggles that people face, what advocates can do to help, and then share stories of overcoming some of the obstacles. And that's exactly what we're going to do here today. We have Krista Cummins here with us today, and she's faced a lot of different obstacles while finding her position here at GBA. And so, Krista, could you just give us like a brief, I know we're going to dive into everything later on, but could you give us a brief kind of background to like who you are, what your position is, and how you got here?
Yeah, I'm Krista Cummins, and my degree is in architecture. And this is my second stint at GBA. I've worked for two of the different affiliates, both GBA Builders and George Butler Associates.
So, what was your experience like in college, and like what was like your path to finding your first job at college?
Well, so I crammed 5 years of school into 7. Takes a rare skill to do that. So I graduated a little older. I graduated in 2014, and we were still recovering from the 2008 recession, which I believe recessions actually impact the building industry typically on a little bit of a delay. You know, it starts to hit back orders and supply chains with the housing industry a little bit later. So we were still recovering from the 2008, and getting a job out of college was better than it was 5-6 years earlier. But jobs are still really scarce, and there was still a lot of competition. And so I was trying to get into a capstone studio, which would have enabled me to do a job placement through internship.
Okay.
And I quit.
What's a capstone studio?
Capstone studios is kind of like a finale-ish studio. They're not your typical studios. When you're in architecture, you have these long, lengthy studios, and you're in them 3 days a week for lecture and instruction, but you're really in them 5 days a week and 5 nights a week as you're working around the clock. The School of Architecture being the only school at any given university that's open 24/7. So they never lock the doors. The lights are always on. And,
really?
And as a matter of fact,
I remember I used to get annoyed like in the engineering building when the doors would be locked. Because I'd be like you expect me to study all night or like until midnight, but like I can't be in the building. Yeah. So
many of them have sleeping quarters. K-State actually has sleeping.
Really?
K-State has sleeping quarters.
I did not know that.
For the students, and they just have a bunker.
Where that's interesting.
KU didn't have that. So kids would bring in like one of the gals brought in like a dog pillow, and she threw it under her desk, and she would sleep there.
Wow. I feel like I would be like afraid to sleep.
The kids were sleeping everywhere. Like they'd be sleeping in the hallway on an old wooden bench. They'd be asleep at their computers.
Like the airport.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, so that's more standard studio. Capstone studios are more specialized studios, and you don't get to a capstone studio till like 4th or 5th year.
Okay.
And then architecture programs are either bachelor's or master's programs. Most of them have done away with bachelor's programs. Most of them are now master's programs. Okay. So there was one capstone studio that gave you the opportunity for a job placement with an internship program in healthcare. So that was one, and the problem was I tried to do the capstone studio, but the only way that you can do that, and instead of taking your studio at the university, you would take it at the architecture firm. Okay. And so you would just learn on the job. Well, the only problem with that is you have to actually get a job, and it's real. Like you have to go get a real job. And back then, there just weren't that many local opportunities. I mean, I probably could have gone to a bigger city, but I really didn't want to. And so I wanted to keep it local and ended up competing locally, and I would walk in and there'd be 5-6 students there ahead of me, and I never actually got one of the positions, so I had to pass on that studio, and I took a different capstone studio the following year. But the market, the way the market was, didn't actually change. So jobs are really competitive, and when I was trying to come out of school, I applied at like 30 different architecture firms, didn't hear back. Then I started applying at engineering firms. Then I started applying at construction firms. Then I just started applying at jobs anywhere I could think of.
Isn't that like great when you're like trying to graduate college and like you're just reaching out to all these companies?
I got a master's degree.
Yeah, and you just have like no idea either like about any of these companies. Like I don't even know if I actually want to work for you.
I was about to go buy groceries somewhere, you know. I was like, gosh, I need a job. I got to pay these loans. They're not in a deferment anymore. I got to make some payments. So, so I ended up sending out well over 100 resumes. And I was getting these random callbacks from companies I didn't even remember applying for, because who remembers when you're sending out that many resumes? I mean, you're like on Career Builder, you're on Monster, you're on LinkedIn, and so suddenly someone calls you back, hey, Krista, just giving you a call back, and you're sitting there like processing as quickly as you possibly can. Like, who is this and what is this firm? Who is this company? Yeah, some of the jobs I got callbacks on, where one of them was, when I was in high school, my mom has a technical degree. She used to work for radio, television, and she worked in the cell phone industry. So I helped her out when I was in high school, like mostly doing filing for her, but she did cell phone repairs. And I remember helping clean the phones and like replacing like the antennas or whatever. Yeah. It was the 2000s, but we had antennas on our phones back then. But that was on my resume because it was my first job, you know? And so I remember getting a call back from a company. I still don't even know who the company was. And the guy's like, yeah, we saw that you have cell phone repair work on your resume. We think you'd be a good fit to help test oscillators. And I'm like,
gosh.
Right. Yeah, I'm a great fit for that.
I remember.
What's an oscillator? I'm like Googling this.
I remember like doing interviews like my senior year of college, and like you're trying to gather your experience and like make it sound like it fits. And like I remember during college, like my only experience was with manufacturing, because that's like what I did every summer as I worked at a manufacturing company. And so like when I was interviewing at these construction companies, they're like, what is your experience? And I'm trying to figure out how like I can relate manufacturing to construction.
Can make a mean cup of coffee.
Yeah, literally.
Can answer the phone with the best of them.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely relate there.
Yeah, and then I didn't end up taking that job though. It was actually good money, but it was second shift and it was a contract deal, and I had to sign a contract with them for like 6 months. I'm like, ooh, I want to do that because I'm trying to get a real job here. I got a master's, you know.
And second shift,
right,
is rough.
Yeah, and so I was like, let me think about this. If I get really desperate, then I'll take this. But then the next call I got was for a restoration company that did smoke, fire, water damage repair. And I thought, okay, well, it wasn't as good of money, but it was a day shift, and I didn't have to sign a contract, and that was more palatable to me because I was looking for a different job, and I wanted this just to get me through so I could make some payments on some school loans. And, so I took the job. And I did a variety of things there, from estimating to field work, to where I learned I was allergic to mold. And I hated dealing with water because you get called out at every time of the day and night whenever a pipe breaks, you know, holidays, it doesn't matter, you know, you have to go respond immediately. So it was my first time dealing with field crews too, kind of gave me some early construction exposure, and I got some knowledge on how that process works with restoration. They wanted to put me, because of my degree, as an estimator, which, take that with a grain of salt. It's very different when you're estimating for insurance companies as opposed to estimating to build a building.
Right.
They have a full-on database. It's so easy, McClain. You'd love this. It's like a full-on database that's built in from the insurance companies, and you just go in and you have to select drop down. Like, I need some carpet. I need some, I need some gypsum wallboard.
Did you enjoy that work? Or was it like, because you kind of said it's so easy to fill out the form, was it like
doing an estimate. The only problem was you had to do a little bit of old school. So you had to go out into the field and actually physically take your measurements.
Okay.
And if you were dealing with a building that was good size, your estimates are a little rough, you know, but you got there with their lasers and your tapes, and then I would draw it out on graph paper and make the graph the scale, so that I would get really close when I bring them back, and then I'd have to redraw it into the computer when I got back to my desk, and then I would just start pulling in all this stuff from this really awesome database that would just tell you the price, the current prices per, square foot, linear foot, whatever they were. Yeah, so when I was working on that job, they also wanted me managing field crews. Okay. And that was when I was like, oh, okay, so I was out in the field, and one of the jobs that we had was an elderly woman that had dementia. And she was also a hoarder, and she started a fire in her house because she turned on the stove, and there was so much stuff all around the stove, and she forgot that she turned it on. So she calls her insurance company, they call us, we go out there. And so my first exposure to helping her was because of the dementia, she would get very, very confused. So as we started taking things out of her house to take it back to the facility so that we could clean it, she started to accuse us of robbing her, was the first thing.
Yeah, because you're going in there,
stuff would just go missing in her house, and she'd get confused. Oh gosh! So that was one of my first exposures of like dealing with people from different backgrounds. And then so her insurance company moved her into a second apartment. She had a dog. She had a good sized dog. The dog survived the fire, and when everybody asked her how the fire started, how the stove get left on, she said the dog did it. She said, it's a great excuse. The dog did it. The dog bumped the stove, and I didn't know it was on. And so they go, okay. Well, when she moved into the apartment, her grandkids took the dog. And she was living in that apartment by herself, and another fire started in the second apartment that she was living in. And the fire department showed up, and they put out the fire. She survived that one, twice survivor of a fire. And then they asked her, now, how did this one start? She said, well, the dog did it. But the dog didn't live there anymore.
I feel like my dad he owns a construction company out of the Quad Cities, and they do residential repair. And so he'll tell me stories about working with just people who own houses. They don't know anything about the construction side of things necessarily. And I think that's so different versus what our realm of working with the client side, different struggles in each and different positives in both. But I always find that I would feel like that would be a really interesting job, going into people's houses, seeing how people live.
I got to see some very interesting houses for sure. I think one of the houses I went into, it was bar none the largest house I'd ever been into. The basement was 10,000 square feet. And I'm like, wow, what does this man do for a living? And they said at the moment in time, he was in Brazil with he had 6 kids and his wife, and they were down there. He lives half the year in Brazil. He lives half the year back here in the United States. I'm like, what does he do for a living? Apparently he invented the software that they use when you walk into O'Reilly Auto Parts and you're like, hey, I need windshield wipers for my, 2012 Toyota or whatever. Right. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay. And they pull it up in the system. That database is what he invented.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's a huge house. But the reason why I was there is because of the mold, I guess. He turned off his air conditioning when he left for summer to go to Brazil. That's when I learned out, I figured out I was allergic to mold. And this was not the right career path for me, and I needed to get out. So. It was miserable.
So obviously you aren't still working there. So how did you get out of that job, and what was the next job?
Well, I was still applying for jobs, and I still had a bajillion resumes out, and I was still waiting for callbacks. And
so you kind of knew when you were going into that job that wasn't going to be your
they knew it too.
Job. Okay.
I mean, they kind of wanted me to stay. They will promote you to management, but then they kind of knew it was a little bit of a long shot. So they really weren't hard feelings when I left. But yeah, I did get a callback, and the callback that I got was from Paige Wixon. And that was back in the days, she was working for construction. And I get this call. It was like, hey, we got your resume here and we'd like to bring you in for an interview. And so I'm like, oh, all right. And so we go to schedule this, and I had no idea this company was. And I'm like, I'm sorry, so where are you? So that, I need some directions, I'm coming in for the interview. And she gave me the address, and my face just went ashen pale, because it was the company across the street from where I was currently working. This was a dead-end road in an industrial complex. It was nothing back there, but it was mostly just warehouses that were back there. And they had just purchased the office section or rented an office section of that building. So I was just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to pull this off? How am I going to leave here and go there without being spotted by my current boss that I'm going across the street for an interview?
I'm just going for a walk.
Oh my gosh, it was horrible. So I told Paige I would come in for the interview, but only if we could do it at 7 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And
I bet Paige loved that.
Oh, she loved it. She was living out in Johnson County. This was North Kansas City. This was up in Riverside, actually. Mm-hmm. And so this was like at least probably a 45-minute drive for Paige to get into work. So I had to get up at the wee hours of the morning to come rolling in for this extremely early interview. And I did actually interview with Paige.
So how did you and Paige know each other?
We didn't.
Oh, really?
That was how we met.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the first time I met. And so she interviews me, and then there's like a few days later, I don't hear anything. And as I'm leaving, because I'm like, I got to figure out how I'm going to change and get back into like my work clothes and get across the street.
Right.
And I don't even remember how I did that part. I think I had to drive in town somewhere and then come back.
Yeah.
And I was like panicking because as the interview ran an hour and I have to get to work, and I'm looking at as the cars are starting to pull into the driveway and my car is parked right across the street. Mm-hmm. So I finally, I'm like trying to hurry up the interview. We get out of the interview and I leave, and I get to work and I'm like super nervous because now I'm looking across the street and I'm seeing them go in and out of their building all day long, and I'm just like, that was like sweaty palms. Like that was like, why did I do that? You know?
Yeah, that'd be really hard to try to focus on an interview while you're thinking that in your mind. Is my boss across the street and I see my car here?
Exactly. Yeah. So
I should have picked a coffee shop.
Yes. Yeah. What was I thinking?
Or like a lunch.
But yeah, a few days later, I get a call from Paige's boss at that time, and he says, "We want to call you in for a second interview," and I'm like, "Oh." Okay, we gotta do this again, you know? And he's like, I'm like, why do we gotta come in for a second interview? He goes, I got some mixed reviews about you in your first interview. Never let Paige live that down. Like, what did you say? She denies it. She says she didn't say anything. Like, he got mixed reviews. I got a second interview. So I came back and they gave me the job and started working there. But they didn't let me start. Like they made me wait 4 months. I accepted the position. I signed the terms and I sent it back. Mm-hmm. And they said, we can't start you yet. We'll call you when we. And I'm like, wait, what? And it was the middle of summer, and I didn't understand they were in the middle of bid season at that time. But that wasn't the reason why they didn't start me. The reason they didn't start me is they literally didn't have a place to put me. They kept telling me that over the phone because I would call in, you know, like, I was so like, it's up in a month, you know, like, right. How are we doing? Am I still in?
Gosh, that'd be like such a stressful time.
Are you guys gonna let me work there or not? And and they're we're still gonna bring you in. We just don't have anywhere to put you. And I'm like, what does that mean exactly? You know. Yeah. And I, other than the interview, I had only been in the bottom part.
Was
it was
a 2-story office?
It was a 2-story. It was very small. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there were only there were 3 offices on the first floor, and I hadn't been upstairs. And then there was the lobby area, and that was it. And apparently upstairs there was a conference room and 3 more offices, and that was it. Mm-hmm. So I finally, when they do bring me in, I make it upstairs because that's where they decided to put me. Well, outside of the conference room and 2 of the offices, there was this interim space that they used as like a break room.
Okay.
And it was more or less a pass-through space for the people coming in and out of the offices. Mm-hmm. And that's where they put me.
Wow.
So they threw this old desk out there.
I wonder like what the situation was for the months prior where they didn't have a space for you. Like, was someone also working out of that?
No, actually, no.
They just decided we're going to make it work.
They just decided they're going to make it work, yeah. I think that they were just growing. And so I was the newest addition, and I do think that was the most people they had in the office up to that time.
Okay.
And what I don't understand, though, is from what I had been told, is that people had shared offices before. Now, there was one office that was quite large, and they used that for all of the admin staff and the marketing staff. Okay. So there was 3 people in that room. And but Chris had this huge office up on the 2nd floor. And from what I understood, Paige used to share that office with him, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, why couldn't I share a little real estate? Like, couldn't we move the desk in there and, I could kind of have my own spot? But it wasn't the case. So it became kind of a joke. It became kind of a joke that I was in the hallway, basically, more or less was where my job was. And it wasn't that I cared. I really didn't care. I was happy to have a job, right? You know? And Chris was super quiet. It was just, you're in that room, people would come in, they'd put something in the microwave, be cooking their lunch or whatever, and they're all like, I'm really sorry I'm in your office.
Yeah. I feel like if someone like consistently brought stinky like lunches, that would be a problem for me.
Yeah. But the funny thing was the guy that was sitting in the office next to Chris was the loudest guy in the office. And I was right outside his door. He conducted all of his business on speakerphone. He was kind of, but it was, so that's when I grabbed those little headphones out and started just making sure that I had those in my ears. So yeah. I was supposed to be an assistant estimator is what they wanted me to be. And I was supposed to be probably working, I imagine, with Chris quite a bit at that point. But that course redirected quickly because they fired the gal that was doing their marketing a week after I started. And they had lost several proposals based on technical. They were not technically tight. And it wasn't that they were qualified. It's just they made errors.
Right.
And so we went into the conference room. It was my first meeting. They dragged me in there, and I'm hearing them lecture the marketing coordinator on the errors that she had made in the technical package. And because we were talking, it's millions of dollars every time you. And he basically the boss laid down the rules that we can't lose on technical. We can lose on price, but we can't lose on technical. You can't control price all the time, but we have control over the technical.
Right.
And so that was an inexcusable error. So they fired her, and they came rushing up to my desk and said, "Hey, wait, you have a design background, right? You went to school for architecture, so you know how to use InDesign, right?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, like everybody in design school knows how to use InDesign." And they're like, "Well, great, because we've got 2 proposals going out the door on Friday, and they're both in InDesign, and nobody knows how to open that stupid program." So they like quickly funnel me like a license, and I'm like, "Okay." And I had Paige like sitting over my shoulder telling me exactly what she wanted, and so I'm like, "Okay," and I just followed instructions, and we turned them both in, and we won both of them. Now, the company was perfectly qualified for this proposal, so I'm not taking any credit by any stretch for typing in whatever the last bits that we typed in were, but it just gave them some reassurance, and they put me in that role. They backfilled me for marketing, and which was not what I intended to do, and I ended up staying in that job for 3.5 years, but we ended up being very, very successful, and I never got to finish calculating what our hit ratio was, but I have no doubt this one was well above 70%. We won almost everything that we chased. We may have even been in the 80 percentile, I'm not sure. So, but yeah, the company was, but part of that was excellent field staff, really good project managers. They had already established, they've been in business about 4 years, 5 years, something like that. Already established a legacy and a little bit of a portfolio with these clients. And we were putting out good technicals and good pricing. So, did
you ever feel like better at all that like you went into the position thinking you were going to do estimating, and then you ended up going down that like proposal path, or were you like excited and happy with what you were doing? I was. I didn't know what it was at first, and I didn't understand. I didn't understand how companies typically divided their resources and the resources that usually were put on proposals versus the ones that were put on project operations. So I really, really, really wanted construction experience. I mean, that's why I went there. I wanted to learn how to be an estimator and a project manager. So there was always a huge desire to do that. But what ended up happening is that my role expanded on the marketing side, and I ended up becoming the director of marketing, ended up having a team of 2 underneath me. And I ended up getting to, just design a number of things for the company in terms of their marketing materials, and helped out with the websites, and started to go to the same events, and started to kind of build it the way that I wanted to build it. And then that expanded even further to where I was helping on some of the business side of things as well. And so that exposure is rare, and that's pretty invaluable, and I didn't really know that at the time. So I probably should have appreciated it more than I did. But my desire was always, I'm an architect, and I didn't want to be in marketing. I wanted to be an estimator and a project manager, which ultimately I ended up becoming. But so there was actually some bitterness because I never got taken out of that role. Right.
So
I feel like I've found myself in the same experience a few times. I've only been in my career for almost 4 years now. But where you're like, oh, this is such a great opportunity, and there's it's like an opening kind of where you can learn so much through that, but it's not on the path that you had envisioned, where it's is this going to get me to the next level in my path? It's kind of taking you on a little detour where you can get some experience and then maybe get back to it, or maybe you go down a different path. So.
Yeah, that experience is helping me now, but back then I was I very much like variety. I'm not much into routine, and I heard a quote that if you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted. And that's what I felt was happening to me, was because I was good at that job. I was a very good writer. I excelled at English in both high school and college, and was also good graphically and could work in design pretty well because I'd been working in it for about 4 or 5 years. And towards the end of my stint, it had been more like, 7, 8 years, something like that I'd been working in design. So, but what I also very quickly learned is when I'd go and have conversations with my boss about, he would start to get, drill down, like, Krista, are you happy? Are you happy in your job? Are you happy in your role? And I would sit there and think about it. And that just caused utter panic on him. And he would be like, wait, are you, like, answer me, Krista. Answer me. Do you like your job? And I'm like, I want to be an estimator. And I would say that to him. And he's like, well, we're gonna get you there. I'm like, all right, this is starting to feel like a carrot is being dangled in front of me. And I just felt like I wasn't going to get that opportunity. Yeah. And I was applying for other jobs, and I was trying to leave the company because I wanted exposure to do more with my career. But what I also realized was, if you're in one of those situations where you feel like you're the only one that can do your job and you feel like you can't be replaced, you also have a great deal of, you have a high value. And so that makes you be able to negotiate. So I, one time, started interviewing people to work underneath me, and my marketing coordinators to work underneath me. And I said, what are your salary requirements? And I write them down. Almost always, they either were matching me or wanted more than what I was making. And so I'm like, I hadn't had a raise in a year and a half. So I went into my boss's office and said, we need to talk about a raise. And there was no questions. There was no balking. There was, how much do you make? And how much do you want to make? And so we talked about it a little bit, and I said, these are the salaries of the personnel that are trying to enter the firm, and this is where I am. He goes, I'll fix that. And it was the largest raise I had ever received at that point in my career. And he did give me a nice raise, and I was happy with the raise. And he also gave me a nice bonus.
Did you wish you would ask sooner?
I do.
Like, dang it.
I do. I didn't really realize that, you could do that. And so it was a learning curve. But hey, if you're that valuable to a company and you're the only one that can do your job, then you have a lot of influence over how that job looks for you.
Yeah.
So that's, I never did become an estimator or a project manager. But I was trying to apply for other companies. And what I found out was that was very difficult when you're a designer working in construction and you're trying to transfer to the design side. That became a very difficult obstacle that I didn't know existed, because the design side would look at me as though I was a new grad. And they would say, well, you don't have any design experience. So we're basically bringing you in at an entry-level position. So therefore, you deserve an entry-level salary. And I'm like, no, you're getting somebody who's been cross-trained and is bringing you dual experience with construction, and I deserve to at least maintain my current salary. And every single design firm that I worked for refused to hire me based on the fact that I was currently working in construction, and they all wanted me to start at a much lower salary. So it became very difficult for me to transfer out of design. So I thought, I'm going to have to stay in construction. I think my career path has just been paved for me, because the likelihood of me transferring over to design was not looking good at the time.
I think, especially in college, you don't realize that your first job, you definitely went on a journey where you weren't starting off in architecture and then you just followed that path. But a lot of times your first job dictates what path you're going to go down, because unless you want to start over, from ground zero, which people do, and they're like, no, I want to do this other thing, so I'm going to start over. I'm going to start with the lower salary, entry level position, and work my way up again. But it's when they don't translate between construction and engineering like you think they would,
Yeah.
It makes it really hard, I feel like, to switch.
It was definitely for that point in my career.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately what happened was they ended up closing their doors, or rather the government ended up closing their doors.
Yeah.
After 3.5 years, I think, of working there, it was discovered that the boss was doing nefarious things, and the government knew about that too. 8 different federal agencies investigated the firm, and it was a very difficult time to be in your first, big job, first career job. So they corralled us all in this conference room, and we all had to be investigated, basically, on account of what he was doing. So because of my position, because I had some it was lower level, but some involvement with the corporate activities, and I also, because I was the proposal writer and director of marketing, I was the first person they pulled out of the room. But in my defense, they called 3 people before me, but nobody was there. They wanted to know, they didn't know where my boss was. He was not there. He was actually, we didn't know where he was. We found out later he had just gotten married. And so we just found out he was actually at the hospital with his wife because she was expecting, and they were at an appointment together. So he was not there, and the president of the company was also not there that day. The director of operations was also not there that day. So I was the first person that they pulled from the conference room and ended up in a federal interrogation for 6 to 7 hours.
Gosh.
With no breaks.
Wow.
And finally, when they did release me, they told me I had to come back. Mm-hmm. So I had to come back the next morning. They weren't trying to prosecute any staff. They just wanted information from staff. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like there were, but there was a search warrant issued, and they issued it to me. There was, they had to turn the building, they had left the building on lockdown. And so no of the other staff could come and go. I was the only one that could come and go inside the building. And they had to turn the building back over to me when the investigation was over. And I actually had to do a walkthrough with the federal government. And of course there's missing stuff everywhere because they confiscated a ton of evidence.
Right, like where was your boss?
Well, they caught him. Like when he came home from the hospital, there were 20 agents there, and they had the house surrounded. So they got him, and he's serving now. Mm-hmm. So, but that was a multi-year-long investigation, which I was supposed to be a material witness in, and was one of the top 2 people in the company they wanted to testify in court. And I would still get calls from, it's over now, the investigation's over, and I did not have to testify, but I was like shaking in my boots. Like, there was no way I wanted to go into court and testify against my old boss. Right. Yeah, just because it's like, that's a really it's emotional. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that I was afraid to tell the truth. It was just that I don't want that experience.
Right. Yeah, I don't think anyone does.
He was a friend too. I mean, that was the thing. It was, we were a very close unit company that we worked together all the time. And, we would go to tailgates and barbecues, and, we were all at his wedding. We were all there the day he got married. So that was just something I didn't want to have to go through. I was really happy I got spared from that. So yeah.
So that's definitely a pivotal moment in your career, I'm assuming. Because, what did you do from that point? Because now you don't have a job suddenly that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, so all the accounts were frozen, and it was the day before payday, and nobody got their payday. Nobody got their salaries. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a second income. I'm single, and so I needed that paycheck. So I tried for 2 weeks straight to see if there was any way we could keep the company afloat. But after 2 weeks, we all agreed that was not possible. And so everybody was given layoffs letters, and I offered to write letters of recommendation for any of my staff or any of my coworkers. Mm-hmm. And we all went our separate ways, and I had to find a job immediately. And I was sitting there thinking, I paid some bills, but not all my bills for the month. And I think the one bill I hadn't paid was my house payment. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, what can I cancel? So I went home, I was canceling everything. so that I didn't have to pay for it anymore. And then I paid everything. And then I called my sister and took a 1-month loan from her. And I paid her back right away. But she paid my house payment that one time for me.
That's a good sister.
I know, she is a good sister. As a matter of fact, when she found out what was happening, she flew in because she was traveling at the time. She was in Alaska, I think. She flew in from Alaska and stayed with me for about a week or so. And my mother also stayed with me for about a week while this was all going on. And so, so I went and I just I have to have a job right away. And it's so hard to get a job so what I did was, it was summertime, it was March, So I picked up the phone, I called a local nursery, it was down the street from me, and I sent them my resume, and I thought they're never gonna call me back. So I picked up the phone and I called them and I said, hey, look, I know you have my resume in front of you, and I know that you see what it says, and I realize that I'm overqualified to be a cashier and sell plants in your store. But I said, look, I just lost my job, and I really need a job, and I know you need help. It's summertime. You need staff. I will come in and I will work for you over this the summer, give you some summer help, and I'll have some money, and it's a win-win here. And I said, and then when the season is over, I'll go my separate ways because I will hopefully have another job at that point in time. And the HR manager on the other phone was really quiet for a second. She said, well, when can you come in for an interview? And so they brought me in and they put me in service desk and cashiering because I did that when I was in college. And so that's what I did for about 3 to 4 months. And I did get another job within that time frame, and it was an estimator position, working for a small GC.
It all works out.
It does. It did work out. And so I kept that part-time job through the summer until they started doing their end of summer layoffs. And then I was one of the ones they cut, and they said, we appreciate you. You're a good worker this summer, so thanks for your help. And I said, well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate you guys giving me the job. So I went to become an estimator for a small GC. What I did not know was just how small he was. There were no other estimators in the building. He was so desperate. He needed an estimator right away. I hadn't had really much experience. It was barely supporting the estimators is all I had done. So I came in the door and I take the job, and he goes, how much you want to make? And I just dropped a number down the table, and he was done.
Wow.
No negotiation. He just gave me exactly what I asked for. So I took the job. I'm like, well, that was easy. Not knowing why that was so easy. And then 2 weeks later, we're sitting in the conference room. These darn conference rooms that I get stuck in after I get hired.
Yeah.
So I have PTSD about conference rooms, I think. So I go into this conference room, and he goes, all right, guys, we got 6 months to make it or break it. And I don't know what to say. Company is tanking. I'm like, what? I just got laid off. I'm not going to do this again.
Seriously.
So I was like, and I'm the only estimator? Well, we did make it. I was there for 6 months, exactly. And who do I get a call from? From Paige. She calls me again. She goes, well, if you're not happy where you are, why don't you just come right over here with us? There was basically, the interview was a formality. I came over to GBA Builders. They hired me right away, and they promoted me to APM. And I did get a bump in pay for getting that promotion to APM, and started working with the industrial team, actually, with builders. And I did that for 2 years. And that time was Builders was growing a lot during that time.
How many people were at Builders?
I don't exactly know how many people. We were in a massive hiring stage because of the growth. So at the time, Mission Critical Builders was still integrated with the current Builders team. And we were in an older location in the building, and we were being, because of the growth, Builders was so spread out because they just didn't have spots for them to be together. Unfortunately, after I got hired, we shelved the projects that were supposed to come in the door.
Oh, gosh.
And they just hired Chris Arias, too. He got hired 6 months after me. And I was like, oh, my gosh. And so we were both nervous here. That was tens of millions of dollars worth of work that got shelved that didn't come into the company. I'm like, what are we going to do now? And we all started rapidly bidding on the street. Federal didn't exist yet. Paige was still creating it. She had just gotten here a year before. And she hadn't won a single project at that time. She was still working on it. And she was building the JVs and things. So what happened was I ended up getting sent to the field on numerous stints. I was either on industrial projects, or I was out in the field.
Like in what position? Like as a field engineer?
No, as a backup superintendent.
Okay.
No, well, actually, when they did send me to Minneapolis for quality control, and that was the first time I went to the field for quality control. I was up there for 6 weeks, but they sent me up there in January, and it was negative 14 degrees.
Yeah.
And I was not prepared for this. So that was freezing cold. But yeah, so that was my first stint in Minneapolis, and then I would be sent in as a backup superintendent, which terrified me greatly because it's not really a strength of mine, but I would cover people's PTOs and vacations and whatever. So, and then I decided I really wanted to see, again, since this was a full AEC company, if I could become an architect and move over to the architecture side of things. At the time, though, architecture also was not growing and did not have any openings. So I left the company altogether and went to go work for an architecture firm. And this was 2020. And I was moved into a brand new department. It was a design build group. And they thought, you're perfect for that. You've got the perfect background for this. And 10 days after I started working at this company, they shut down the whole country for COVID. And I was just like, what in the world? And we're talking, this is an entertainment architecture.
I thought you were going to say, like, they shut down that company, too. I was like, oh, my gosh, you have, like, a bad track record.
I was beginning to think so. I was beginning to think, maybe this isn't the right career for, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Not that superstitious, but this just doesn't feel right. Something's just not working out here. So I know, no, they shut down the whole company or country for COVID, and everybody got sent home. And I mean, I just started. I didn't know anybody. I barely knew my boss. And now I'm working from home and I have to meet all of my coworkers via Zoom. And, and I did that for 2 years straight because the work from home period for them was a 2-year stint. And they ended up going through 2 rounds of layoffs. While I was there, I survived both layoffs, but they let go one of our coworkers. Our department started out with 9 projects, I think, when I was there. And during COVID, we went down to 1.
Okay.
And so you can just see, there was 52 people that got laid off at that time. And I was like, oh my word, what in the world is happening here? Like, this is very deflating. And we were still going through the investigation for Zyson, and I was still getting phone calls about how I was going to have to appear in court. And I had to explain this to my new employer. Both of my new employers, the one that when I was an estimator, builders knew about it fully, obviously, and then this new company, because it was a 5-year investigation, I had to fill them in on, I might have to be out for some court dates. I don't have a choice of being subpoenaed.
Gosh.
So
did you have to fill out, like, when you're applying to jobs on the application where it says, like, are you involved in any federal investigation? Or whatever, like that
wasn't on my application. Wait a minute, what box are you talking about?
Like, don't you have to, like,
don't
fill
give
out
anybody any ideas. I did not. No.
Oh gosh.
I was honest about it.
Yeah.
I let them know the truth.
No,
so. I'd already been investigated.
Yeah.
They weren't coming for me. So no, but it ended up again not having to appear in court, and I was so grateful about that. But with the global closure of everything and the market shrinkage with the entertainment, I decided I wanted to be in something more stable. And after 2 years of working in the post-COVID environment, I decided to come back to life science and work for GBA. And they did have openings. Obviously, they had a lot of openings at that time. And I came back to GBA in 2022. And it was a very nice reception back. They just treated me as though I had never left in both the offer that they provided and just the reception of my return. So it was I think definitely the right decision. It's worked out for me pretty well over here. It also puts me way closer to home. I'm not working in Kansas City anymore. I live pretty close to the office, about 10 minutes away. So nice. We get to work with some old colleagues that I worked with before. And yes, I helped them get through sort of the life science when it was spiking or it was skyrocketing. And we've seen that start to taper off a little bit and kind of level out a little bit here and there. But we're growing other markets now, as you do. Your markets always ebb and flow. And they've given me the opportunity now to use my background, my experience, to help grow some of those markets. And we're growing the federal design side now. We've been working on that since February of last year. We're really excited about the volume that we're tracking right now. We're really excited with the pace I think that we are on. And I think that we could see some fast growth with this market. I think it's going to be a good market and a really diversify our portfolio. So this to me, I have like two sort of dream jobs, and this one here, being a design federal lead, like a program manager, is definitely one of them. So for like, that was one of the two. If I couldn't have the other opportunity, then I wanted this one, and they gave it to me. So, worked through a lot of adversity, but got to a place where I'm really happy with my career, and I don't feel like I'm a jinx anymore. And
so far,
yeah, that's fair. Yeah. So that's the background.
So do you feel like, did you have experience in federal at any of your other companies?
For design? No.
Or just in general? Like
just Zyson.
Okay.
Construction
so they did
only.
federal construction projects?
100% small business federal.
I feel like too, your experience like with the different barriers you face of like a company closing down for whatever reasons and being investigated by the federal government, and then your like experience like with COVID, starting a new job and getting shut down. Do you think that like pushed you into federal at all, because it is so like there is no risk in federal
I think
money going away?
Part of that is definitely true. With it being a funded, not financed market, with whether the economy is up, down, or sideways, the government is spending our money whether we like it or not. We joke that it's a way of getting a return on our taxes. To sit there and go back and work for the government and get paid for it. And it's, they rarely cancel projects. They rarely VE. They're not just going to pull a job from underneath you like happens in the private, sector. If their capital expenditure budgets get slashed because they don't have sales, that doesn't happen with the federal government. It's not based on sales. They've got their tax dollar budgets and they get them every year. So there's a great deal of consistency, although I joke about the PTSD, but it's actually not funny because we really did have some of it. And so when I started going back to writing federal proposals, I literally walked into Krista's office and said, I'm not sure I can do this.
Yeah, definitely.
I had some really horrible flashbacks. And I had to pull some old templates that came from Zyson, and it was just bringing back the memories. And he's like, I know, Krista. And I knew that he did know what I was talking about. I'm like, this is just going to take me a minute. I need to adjust.
Yeah.
I'm like, do we really want to work in this market? Are we sure?
Yeah.
And he goes, I do, Krista. And here's one thing I'll say very positively about this. I love our military. I love this country. And this has a lot of meaning for me. When we worked at Zyson together, we were working for an SDVUSB. Our boss served multiple terms. Oh, he's not the one that was the nefarious one.
Yeah.
But he still got in trouble because it was his company. But he was a legitimate veteran. He served in Iraq. He served in Afghanistan. He was a fantastic man. He was really a fantastic person. And I felt so grieved for him with everything that happened to him and to his company and to everything that he had built and the legacy. He was semi-retired. And, he deserves normalcy. He deserved to have that work out for him because he didn't do anything wrong. But one of the guys that worked at the company, also his son was an Army Ranger. And he used to say that this is all he wanted to do. He just wanted to provide our military with the best. And he knew that this was just, it had meaning for him. And I suppose that people find meaning in different markets for different reasons. But, you start working with our military and they're really wonderful people. You do too. We get to go out to the military bases. We get to, meet the enlisted men. We get to meet the officers and the women. And we get to hear their stories, and we kind of get to reconnect with the human side and also just the duties that these people carry all the time. And it's really special. We've seen some very dilapidated buildings that I'm, utterly astonished that our military has to be in these buildings, restrooms that don't work, plumbing that's rusted off in walls, the cockroaches that were coming out of the walls. And we're like, we can do so much better. We can do so much better. Yeah. And so I like this market, and I do want to stay in it. Highs and lows for me, but it carries a lot of meaning, and I do want to give the military the best, and it's a special market for me. So
I totally agree. I love how the Corps of Engineers is like really emphasizing partnering. I'm sure, it's been something that they've had a part of their like partnering playbook and things forever, but they're really like putting an emphasis on it in solicitations now and like specs where it's like a requirement. And part of that process is highlighting like the project's mission and like the reason like you're building this building or like who you're building it for. And I think that's made like a huge difference for me to when I'm telling someone about a project I'm working on to get a say, like it's not just a hospital addition or an Army Reserve Center. It's like, this is what we're supporting. This is their mission. And that's like what we're involved in. So I totally agree with like the meaning behind federal construction.
Yeah. It just, I guess in general, a lot of Americans are pretty proud of our heritage and our military and our country. And we tend to be, it's a market I'm happy to be working in. So.
Me too. Well, thank you so much for being here today and like sharing your entire story of like how you got here with everyone, because I know like you face a lot of things that do like you don't like to reflect on, maybe like with that one company going under, and then like your period with COVID and working from home. So I really appreciate you coming on here today and like being so open and honest with us.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I just believe that any obstacle you can overcome it. I don't believe that there are obstacles that you can't find a way to either go. If you can't go over it or through it, you can go around it. There's a way. There's a way that this can work, and there's a way that you will be successful. You will. And there's always going to be challenges, but you just got to be determined, and you've got to give it your all. You got to look for the open doors. You got to look for the closed doors, but you're still going to be successful, and you're going to get there. And I don't know how my story compares to other people's, but I feel like if I can make it through this adversity in a career in 10 years, anybody can.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like you're a perfect example of like perseverance and getting to where you want to be, and not necessarily having the easiest path, but figuring out how you're going to get there. It's a really cool story.
Well, thanks, McClain.
Thank you, Krista. Thanks for coming on. Thanks everyone for listening in to the STEM is Femme podcast. We really appreciate you being here.